They had a rope on her wrist before she understood the words the company agent was shouting. Etta Hale went down hard in the frozen ruts of Coldwater Bend's only street, the washwater still soapy to the elbow on her sleeves, and the man called Silman hauled her 3 steps through the mud before she got her knees under her again. A dead man's ledger, he was crying to the gathered miners. A debt, $41 owed to the Coldwater Silver Company, and no one left to answer for it but the woman who'd taken the dead man's laundry. That was Harmon's account, she said, and hated that her voice shook. Not mine. I washed his shirts. I never signed a thing. You lived under his roof. I rented a corner of his shed. I paid it weekly, in coin. Silman only pulled the rope tighter and grinned for the crowd, because a grinning man looks right even when he is wrong, and the camp had learned long ago that the company's word was the only law that carried this high into the desert. Snow sat gray on the tin roofs. The wind came down off the ridge with a smell of wood smoke and cold iron, and 30 men watched a woman dragged past the assay office and said nothing, because saying something cost more than any of them had. Amos Doyle had not meant to stop in Coldwater Bend at all. He'd come up the grade with a freight wagon loaded with stamp mill parts, and a mule team lathered from the climb, meaning to unhitch, water down, and be gone by first light. He was a man who had learned to want very little. He had buried a wife 2 winters back, fever, quick and merciless, gone between a Tuesday and a Thursday, and since then he had made himself into freight and road and nothing else, because a man who wanted nothing could not be robbed of it twice. Then he came around the corner of the freight office and saw the woman in the mud. He saw the rope first. He was a plain man and he read the world plainly, and what he read was this: a big man on his feet, dry and warm, a woman on her knees, soaked and shaking, and a crowd holding its breath so as not to be noticed. He set the brake. He climbed down. His boots hit the frozen street with a sound that turned a few heads, and he crossed to the middle of it all with the unhurried walk of a man who has decided something. Enough, Amos said. Just the one word. It landed in the quiet like a dropped chain. Silman turned. This is company business, freighter. Move along. You've got a rope on a woman over a dead man's account. Amos did not raise his voice. He had found that a low voice made men lean in to hear their own trouble coming. I've hauled for the Coldwater Company since the road went in. I know how they keep books. And I never once saw them collect a boarder's rent off the boarder's washerwoman. She owes nothing you can show me on paper. Amos put out his hand, palm up, patient as winter. Show me the note with her name on it, her mark, anything. Show me, and I'll walk back to my wagon and let you be. The wind turned pages in a ledger nobody produced. Etta looked up at the stranger from the mud. She could not have said what she expected. Pity, maybe, the kind that curdled into charity and then into a price. But there was none of that in the weathered face above her. Only a flat, tired anger that was not aimed at her at all. He looked, she thought, like a man reading a bad column of figures and getting ready to correct it. Cut the rope, Amos said. Now see here. $41. Amos reached into his coat, and the crowd stirred, and he counted it out of a flat leather roll into his own gloved palm, silver and paper, more than the wretched sum, all of it, and held it up so every man on the street could see it plain. Here's the company's money, every cent of the debt you claim, and change besides. I'll take a receipt in the woman's name marked paid in full, and then the account is closed and her name is clean. And if I hear you laid a hand on her again, I'll drive to Carson and stand in front of a judge and tell him how the Coldwater Company collects its dead men's debts off living women in the street. You want that story on the road ahead of your oar? Silman's grin had gone somewhere and not come back. He took the money. A man like that always took the money. He scrawled a receipt against the assay office wall with the crowd watching, and Amos read every word of it before he let the man go, and then he crouched down and worked the rope off Etta's wrist himself, his big scarred fingers surprisingly careful with the swollen skin beneath. Can you stand? He asked her, low, meant for her alone now. I can stand. She proved it. Her legs shook, and she made them stop. She would not be carried up out of that mud like a sack. She got to her feet on her own. Mud to the knee, chin level, and something in the freighter's eyes changed when she did. A small, surprised respect, quickly hidden. "Good," he said. "Then let's get you out of the wind." He did not touch her again. He walked beside her, half a step off, the way a man walks a spooked horse, and the crowd opened and closed behind them, and found, all at once, a great many other places to be. She told him the whole of it in the lee of his wagon, wrapped in a horse blanket that smelled of dust and animal warmth, her hands around a tin cup of coffee he'd poured off his own fire, without asking whether she wanted it. Her husband had died on the grade the first winter, a slide of loose rock, and she had stayed, because staying was cheaper than leaving, and because leaving took a stake she did not have. She washed for the single men. She was good at it and honest about her prices, and she asked no one for anything, which in a camp like Coldwater Bend was a kind of quiet crime, because a woman who needed nothing gave the company nothing to hold over her, until a boarder died owing, and Silman, short in his own accounts, had gone looking for the softest place to make the numbers meet. "He picked me," she said, "because he thought no one would stand up. He thought right about the camp." Amos looked at the fire. He thought wrong about the day. She studied him over the cup. "Why did you?" He was quiet a long moment. The mules shifted in their traces. When he answered, it was not the answer she'd braced for. "I had a wife," he said. "She's gone now. Fever." He turned a stick of wood in his hands like it might tell him something. "She used to say a man's whole worth was what he did, the moment it would have been easier to do nothing. I didn't much like hearing it at the time. A breath that wasn't quite a laugh. Reckon I liked it better once I couldn't." Etta said nothing. She understood. Better than most. The arithmetic of grief. How you spent years paying down a loss that never came clean off the books. "You can't stay here," he said finally. "Silman paid today. But a man like that keeps a grudge, like a tick keeps a dog. Come spring, he'll find another ledger with your name nowhere in it and your neck close by. And go where? I run freight out of a station, down in Willow Draw. Lower country, water year-round." He said it plain, laying it out like goods on a tailgate. No pressure in it, no hook. "There's a woman there does the depot wash and she's getting on, and wants to quit it. Honest work, your own wages, your own door that locks. I'd not be under the same roof. I keep a room off the barn." He looked at her straight then, and made sure she understood the shape of the offer. "You'd owe me nothing. Not the $41. Not thanks. Not one thing more than a fair day's washing for fair pay. I'm not buying anything, Mrs. Hale. I'm offering a road out. You take it or you don't, and either way I drive you as far as you want to go." It was the "you'd owe me nothing" that undid her, though she did not let it show. She had spent 2 years being a debt other people carried. To be handed a door that locked and told the account was already square, that was a thing she had stopped believing existed.
"Sata,"
she said. "If we're to share a road, it's Etta." Something eased in his face. "Amos," he said. They drove out of Coldwater Bend the next morning before the camp was awake, her small trunk lashed behind the seat and the mules leaning into the cold. She did not look back at the street. She looked ahead, at the grade dropping away toward green country, and once, a mile down, she felt him glance over at her and pretended not to notice, and smiled to herself where he couldn't see. Willow Draw was everything he'd said, and less lonely than he'd let on, because a man who wants nothing is often a man with a great deal saved up to give. She took the depot wash and did it well. She kept her own door and her own wages, and for the first winter, her own careful distance, and he let her keep it, and never once made her feel the space between them was a wall he was waiting to see come down. But he left kindling at her door on the cold mornings. He mended the sprung hinge on her shutter without being asked, and without a word about it. When a driver came through mouthy and drunk and followed her toward the wash line, Amos was simply there, between, saying nothing, until the man remembered urgent business elsewhere. And afterward, Amos didn't puff up about it or ask for a thing, just went back to greasing an axle like the matter had never risen. It was that, in the end, that turned her heart. not the $41, not the rescue the whole camp had watched. It was the 10,000 smaller times he stood between her and the cold and never sent a bill. The reckoning came, as Amos had known it might, on a raw evening late in that first winter. Silman rode into Willow Draw with 2 men behind him and old company paper in his fist. He had lost his place at Coldwater Bend. A shorted ledger will always find its owner in the end. And he had ridden down out of the high desert, carrying his ruin like a grudge, hunting the one person he'd decided was to blame. He came off his horse in front of the depot and threw the paper in the mud at Etta's feet and told her she was coming back up the grade to answer for what her lie had cost him. Etta did not run. She had done enough running from that man. She stood in the doorway of the wash house, with her arms floured to the elbow and her chin level, and she said, clear enough for his men to hear, that she owed him nothing and never had, and that he knew it, and that they knew it too. Then Amos came around the corner of the barn. He did not have a gun in his hand. He had a wagon jack of all things, still greasy from the axle he'd been under, and he set it down slow on the tailgate where all 3 men could see him choose to set it down. Then he walked into the space between Silman and the woman, the way he had once walked into a frozen street, and he stopped there. You're a long way down the mountain, Silman, he said, low, and you've thrown a dead account at a woman who paid it in full with my own silver, in front of 30 witnesses, marked and receipted. I kept the paper. Judge and Carson has a copy of it now, and a letter besides, telling him just how the Coldwater Company came to be short in its books. He let that sit. You ride up on this woman again, on any road, and it isn't her name that ends up in front of the court. It's yours. Now those 2 behind you, they're paid men, and no paid man ever rode into a hanging for another man's grudge. Ask them. The 2 men behind Silman looked at each other, and then at the mud, and then one of them turned his horse without a word. Silman stood a long moment with the whole cold weight of it settling on him. He was a man who took the money when there was money and ran when there was none, and there was none here, only a hard, quiet freighter who had already thought 3 moves past him. He gathered his ruined paper out of the mud. He rode back up the grade alone, and Willow Draw never saw him again. Amos picked up his wagon jack and went back under the axle like nothing had happened. And that, the not puffing up, the not asking to be thanked, was the last stone off the wall around Etta's heart. It was that, more than the standing between, that turned her, the 10,000 smaller times he sheltered her from the cold and never once sent a bill. He asked her, the second spring, on the bench outside the depot, with the willows going gold-green and the mule team dozing in the sun. He asked it plainly, the way he did everything, twisting his hat in his scarred hands like a boy. I've no pretty words, he said. You know what I am. Freight and road, and not much else. But I'd be honored, Etta, if you'd let me be more than the man who paid a debt that was never yours. I'd have you as my wife, and I'd spend the rest of it making sure no one ever again puts a rope on your wrist for something you never did. She took his rough hand in both of hers. The wrist that had worn Silman's rope pressed warm against his palm. You cleared the ledger the day you said enough, she told him. Everything since then, Amos Doyle, I've come to for myself, and I'd come to you 1,000 more times over. They married under the willows with the depot folk for witnesses and the mules for choir. And on the cold mornings after, when she opened her own door, hers now truly, and his, there was always kindling already stacked and a fire already lit, and a hard, quiet man who had once decided, in a frozen street, that doing nothing was the one debt he would not carry.